Let me now introduce Professor Terence Halliday, who's going to offer some reflections on the report, and then we'll open up the floor for comments and questions. Professor Halliday co-directs the Centre on Law and Globalisation at the American Bar Foundation. He's a specialist on global governance and legal change, and his many books on the UN, international financial institutions, and global regulation examine who makes global standards, the role of states and civil society in the implementation of global law, and the conditions under which global standards make a difference in local practices. Professor Halliday has published widely, and he's also taught at the University of Chicago, Northwestern University, the Australian National University, and Oxford University. He's consulted with the World Bank, the IMF, the Government of China, and the OECD, among others. So, Professor Halliday, we look forward to your reflections.
Thank you, Ambassador Bird. The world has many skeptics about the efficacy of the United Nations. Large numbers of skeptics also question whether any kind of social progress is possible. Today's session and the policy proposals before us provide strong grounds to rebut both kinds of skepticism. We're greatly indebted to the primary authors, Dr. Jeremy Farrell and Professor Hilary Charlesworth, and the Centre for International Governance and Justice and the Australian Government's Civil Military Centre for their vision and their most impressive and wide-ranging consultations and forward-looking proposals. The leadership of the Government of Australia and the active engagement of the UN Rule of Law Group exemplify the possibilities that open up when states and the United Nations, civil society and academic specialists join forces to strive for the high ideals embodied in the United Nations Charter. These aspirations gain increased significance given the extraordinary demands upon the United Nations to protect the weakest and the most vulnerable of people, to constrain force by law in the most conflict-ridden and torn social fabrics of societies across the world. This policy document rightly opens with forthright acknowledgement that arbitrary power, even the exercise of tyranny, remain constant challenges to the world's highest ideals. Inside too many states, there is a seduction of arbitrary power. Even in global governance, a certain arbitrariness can offer the illusory promise of efficiency, effectiveness, and swiftness of action. This policy document immediately reminds us, however, that social progress is possible, that justice can prevail if the United Nations, its members, and its friends heed the call by Secretary General Kofi Annan to adopt rule of law principles of governance. Yet, as always, more can be done. The Security Council can speak with greater authority. The moral and legal order of the United Nations that it seeks to build can be more just. The protections against vulnerable peoples can be more effective. These proposals offer a promising and a powerful and a pragmatic way forward. I find it always valuable to look forward by first of all looking back, to be realistic, to ask why is it that global standards so often fail? Answers to that question are vitally important to set the stage for the policy proposals presented today by Australia's academic, civil society and government institutions. My research on global governance convinces me that global standards fail to change the world for four principal reasons. First, global ideals fail to influence behavior when there is something wrong with the expression of the ideals themselves. Ideals may be so vague that it is impossible to know if they've been implemented, or so rigid that they simply do not fit local circumstances. Second, global standards fail because the authority issuing the standards lacks legitimacy itself. Third, global standards fail to be implemented when they are built on weak foundations. They rely on plausible folk theories rather than solid empirical evidence. Fourth, global lawmakers forget that the ultimate veto power of global standard setting is local. Commonly, sovereign states and local actors effectively say no because they do not believe their sovereignty or local knowledge or local circumstances have been taken seriously enough. It is because these recipes for failure are so widespread that I applaud these proposals and commend them to all state, international organizations, and persons with vital interests in the United Nations. The policy proposals display notable merits that warrant our close attention, I believe, and our very careful consideration. They offer wise reflection coupled with clear roadmaps. First, the policy proposals do reflect high ideals. The policy document takes very seriously indeed the role of the UN, and especially the Security Council, as a global leader. In fact, it considers the United Nations Security Council to act not only as a political authority, but as a moral leader. And as a moral leader, says the report, the Security Council must emphasize one of those most dominant ideals of the 21st century, the rule of law. More than that, the Security Council must exemplify in its deliberations and its actions the values of rule of law that the Secretary General, the General Assembly, and the Security Council itself have adopted as vital for guiding the affairs of nations and the behaviors of their citizens and residents. Recommendation 8, therefore, states that the Security Council should hear the views of actors potentially adversely affected by any prospective decision. Second, the policy proposals are directed at outcomes. These proposals are directed at changes in beliefs and changes in behavior. The proposals, for instance, seek an impact on a single peacekeeper in a remote community, or on a platoon of soldiers from one country embedded in another country with radically different culture, language, religion, and politics. The proposals recognize that those rare but sometimes necessary interventions by force must be seen to be underwritten, to be reinforced by the widespread belief in the rightness of the decision-making to exercise force and the rightness of ways that force itself is both exercised and restrained. Adopting Recommendation 9, which calls for greater reliance on commissions of inquiry and fact-finding missions, as the Ambassador has just said, would ensure that interventions are considered right, appropriate, and proportional. Third, the proposals insist upon empirical foundations. By empirical, I mean, and the proposals mean, verifiable facts. Facts that can be scientifically and systematically collected, analyzed, and respected. We must recognize that these are facts that will be both convenient but also inconvenient to United Nations actors. These empirical foundations insist upon evidence that implementations work. The proposals insist the authoritative interventions by the Security Council must be investigated rigorously. Do they work? Why do they work?